Sasha, let me begin by asking you. Okay, Sasha, what do we expect? Sasha, what do we expect from this conversation? Is Ukraine willing to cede territory for ceasefire, or is ceding territory completely off the table?
Good evening, everybody. Thank you for this translation. So I would say that, of course, people of Ukraine and community, they want to have very, very careful hope for the best and for the ceasefire. But for now, all experience of Ukrainian population, it's every time the ceasefire was announced by Russian Federation, so it never happened. So if there will be no very powerful statements or very powerful sayings from European leaders, from USA leader, so what's going to happen to Russia if they will not follow their promises? I think it's just another talk about ceasefire or about peaceful negotiation, which unfortunately leads to nowhere and make no changes for Ukraine and for Ukrainian population.
Seema Sirohi, in the way you look at this situation, President Trump's meeting with President Putin, now meeting President Zelensky, and with 7 top European leaders there at the White House in Washington, D.C. right now, what kind of forward movement can we expect?
Well, the best forward movement would be the trilateral meeting that President Trump talked about, but there's a lot to happen.
Okay, give me a moment. I think I've lost your link. Let me also bring in Rohit Sharma, who joins us from Washington, D.C. Rohit, what's the buzz in D.C.? Will this, as Seema Sirohi was just telling us, lead to a trilateral Russia, Ukraine, US? And what are all the European heads of state and government saying?
Well, look, Gaurav, they had a good, I think, meeting at the embassy, at the Ukrainian embassy, right before they all came to the White House, except for Macron, who directly came from the airport to the White House. They want to achieve peace. They want to be able to nudge President Trump to get a little tough on Russia. I think their concern is that, they don't want to bully Ukraine to be giving up too much territory. So that's number one. The other thing is, that, as you saw President Trump talk about, that he's hopeful for a trilateral. He's saying that it is possible. We'll have to wait and watch how the things pan out. They just headed into a bilateral. They will go into, all the leaders will be meeting with President Trump right now. So the first concern that every European leader has is that they want security guarantee for Ukraine, and B, they do not want to have anybody bully Ukrainians into giving too much territory. So we'll have to wait and watch on that. But I think those are 2 things on mind of all the European leaders who are at the White House right now.
Okay. Ambassador Sajanhar, do you see forward movement? What's changed between February and now, post that meeting with President Putin? Is President Trump indicating no more weapons, no more giving any free weapons to Ukraine? Europe will have to pay for it. Some air defense systems yet, but the war has to end. Is that the impression you get?
Well, as far as the weaponry is concerned, Gaurav, first of all, thank you very much for having me on the show. As far as weaponry is concerned, definitely, this has been made clear quite some time. Even the last time when the consignment of weaponry had gone from the United States, I think all the American leaders, including Trump, Rubio, Vance, were sort of, backslapping each other and complimenting each other that they were not giving free weapons and that they were being sold and NATO would be paying for them. So I think that has been the pattern that has been set after Trump has come in. But I think as far as peace is concerned, Gaurav, I have, what Mr. Trump is doing is really presenting some sort of a fait accompli to Europe and to Ukraine. Because, there have been informed leaks that have been brought out saying that Ukraine will have to cede territory, including Crimea and some of the others, and also that NATO membership is off the table. So this seems to be, this is something that it appears Mr. Trump has agreed as far with Mr. Putin when he met
Okay.
him in Alaska. So it doesn't leave any further scope for any flexibility or any negotiation or any maneuvering on the part of Ukraine and Europe.
Okay,
We'll
but
really have to wait.
all these seven leaders who've come, and I've got their entire list, Sushant Sareen and Geeta, weigh in on this in just a moment. From Frederick Merz, the German Chancellor, to Emmanuel Macron, the French President, to Keir Starmer, British Prime Minister, Giorgia Meloni, Italian Prime Minister, Alexander Stubb, the Finnish President, Ursula von der Leyen, EU President Mark Rutte, NATO General Secretary, the coalition of the willing, Sushant Sareen. Is this for emotional support, or do they want Trump to continue arming Ukraine and this war to continue? Because Emmanuel Macron seemed to indicate that in case Russia is seen as a victor, there'll be trouble for other countries in future.
Yeah, so the problem is going to be that there could be other trouble for other countries, but do they really want this war to continue? Maybe Western Europe wants the war to continue because they are really not losing people, and it's not their territory that's getting the bomb the hell out of. But I think even for the Ukrainians, it's going to be a very difficult job to accept the loss of territory. Look, Gaurav, we know, everybody knows around the world that accepting loss of territory is the single most difficult thing for any sovereign country to accept. So I think one should look at the predicament of the Ukrainians. But then the problem is, what is the choice? By all accounts, there are only bad options. Either you let the war continue and thousands of people more will die, or you accept a bad deal, which is probably the best of bad deals, and try and get some kind of peace. But then the devil will be in the detail. Will whatever territory is ceded, will it be permanent or will it be temporary?
Okay.
What will be the security guarantees? What will be the nature of those security guarantees? The Russians want that Ukraine be completely disarmed. Will that be on the table? Will that not be on the table?
Totally disarmed and denazified is the terminology that Trump is using, but that may well be a maximalist position. Sushant Sareen, give me a moment as I bring in Geeta Mohan into this conversation, because Geeta, President Putin was very clear. He's not in this for a temporary ceasefire. He wants a permanent settlement, and from what our analysts seem to indicate, that there is no LOC kind of a situation that he wants, that you'll have a festering border with Ukraine. He wants it very clear, no military at the borders, no Ukrainian forces at the borders to target the new Russian territory.
Well, absolutely, Gaurav. Even before the two sides went into a conversation, remember, the US president did not take so many questions from reporters as he did with Zelensky last time around and this time around as well. With Putin, the moment the leaders came in, the press secretary, it was the American side that kept saying, okay, thank you, please leave the room, please leave the room. They did not want any questions because they did not want anything that could scuttle those talks that were really critical and important. And he had already walked back on the demand for immediate ceasefire. So he already knew what the Russians really are coming in to speak on. And the plan was in place, whether it's Russia-US bilateral or, for that matter, what it means to have peace. And like you said, it was not temporary in nature. It's not a ceasefire. He wants complete understanding and clarity on acceptance, on endorsement when it comes to the Donbass region, that's Donetsk and Luhansk, and certainly Crimea. I would have thought it would have gone as far as Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, but that's something that's not been reported or in conversation. So let's see what the conversation today is going to be on Zaporizhzhia, Kherson, Odessa, but certainly not Donbass and Crimea, which for Russia are off the negotiating table.
So, Sasha, let's take this region by region. Initially, Sasha, President Zelensky had indicated there will be no question of ceding any territory. But territories that Russia had in control, for example, since 2014, Crimea, or territory that they had in control, for example, 80% of the Donbass region, Donetsk and Luhansk, will President Zelensky be in a position to cede these territories? I'm not even coming to Zaporizhzhia and Kherson, and Zaporizhzhia has the nuclear power plant. What will be the repercussions if he has to cede these territories to Russia?
I think that President Zelensky now is a very difficult position because for him to declare that territories, we are talking about territories that was annexated since 2014, like Crimea Peninsula and partly Donetsk and Luhansk region. So his promise to Ukrainian people was not to give up on the territories, and we are still have a huge amount of people who are living on that territory and who are waiting to Ukraine to come back. So in order to not to have all the anger of the military personnel of Ukraine and their families and all the community, President Zelensky should follow his promise and try to negotiate all the territories of Ukraine to come back. Otherwise, so it's legalized annexion of the territories for all the countries in Europe, USA, and even Asia. So it's a quite difficult position and quite difficult situation for Ukrainian president for now.
Indeed, Ambassador Sajjanhar, it would appear as, Sushant Sareen was just telling us, the choice is between bad and bad or from bad to worse, whether he accepts the war that continues or ceding territory, which would be disastrous for his presidency.
No, you're right, Gaurav. I think one really has to look at the least worst of all the bad proposals that are on the table. And I think some sort of, one is the absolute ideal position, which is, what is in the Ukrainian constitution, which President Zelensky has also been mentioning, that there will be no ceding of territory. But, there is something also called realpolitik. And,
Yes.
If you have, Crimea has now been with Russia for the last 11 years, since 2014, February of 2014. And also we see that at least the two provinces that have been claimed, whether it's the Donbass, the Donetsk, and the Luhansk, those, I think it will be extremely difficult for Europe, for Ukraine, and the West to recover. I think the best case scenario would be really if Zaporizhia and Kherson, if they can be retained, and what are these security guarantees? Because what Putin is trying to do is to say that there'll be no NATO forces in terms of Ukrainian army. Also, it will be severely limited. Now that is basically significantly compromising the security of Ukraine. And I think those are aspects on which possibly discussions can take place.
And Rohit, are we expecting, best case scenarios, forward movement is a trilateral between President Zelensky, President Putin, and President Trump? The European leaders, and you've been able to speak to some of their teams, are they here for just moral support, or are they here to say, continue giving them weapons, Europe will pay, if Europe has enough funds to pay, given the situation that they're facing? So what is that broader strategy? Okay, you're on mute, Rohit.
No, I think you can hear me. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, go on.
I'm sorry, apologies. So one of the things that was discussed this morning was about the fact that, how will this meeting today, or these meetings, would go, right? And one of the things they talked about was that the security guarantee is the most important thing, and that's the first thing that the European want, and they're coming in to support Zelensky on that. That's the first thing. The second thing, I think, what they're trying to do is they're trying to look at what was proposed by Vladimir Putin as those territorial concessions, and it is assumed at this point in time that he's going to take back to his country and then talk about and sell it to his audience or his people. This is what he should do or shouldn't do. So I think nobody's expecting a realistic, ceasefire or end of the war today, or not even, a trilateral summit, a date to come out of it today. I think the goal is to make sure that Zelensky can understand what the US is asking or are relaying what the Russians have told the Americans, and then the Zelensky and the Europeans can talk about the security
Okay.
guarantees. The other thing is, and this is very interesting, Gaurav, is the fact that Zelensky must take these back to home because the Ukrainian constitution requires a national referendum for
Yes.
any territorial changes. And this is a problem. And obviously, the Europeans are saying that's his problem to figure out. But that's been his talking line. That's what he said in this morning's meeting at the embassy in Ukraine. So there are a lot of concerns at this point in time, but there's no timeline. And as far as President Trump and the Americans are concerned, they just want to keep the momentum going. So yes, you heard President Trump say, we'll talk about the trilateral. I think that's what he wants to do,
So
but he
Seema
wants to do
Sirohi,
sooner.
okay, Seema Sirohi, one is optics, the other is what's happening behind the scenes. So optics are all great. This time, President Zelensky is also suited up. When he was, ushered into the White House, it was very cordial, very polite, unlike what had happened in February, March. But beyond that, what do we realistically expect? End of the road for military supplies to Ukraine to be able to sustain this war? Because President Trump's also making it very clear, we're not giving them anything, we are selling it and Europe is paying for it.
Exactly. So this is where the rubber hits the road for Europe, and they've all come, en masse to DC. One to stiffen, Zelensky's back, but also to sort of show solidarity. They will have to increase their defense budgets. They'll have to buy American weapons if they want to do a serious sort of security presence in Ukraine. So, in terms of this Article 5 thing, I think there's a big step forward by President Trump to even
Mention it.
begin to talk about the fact that the Americans will, in some manner, support the idea of helping to defend Ukraine. If the peace agreement goes through, if the land territory, they call it swap, but I don't think it's a swap. It's like ceding of Ukrainian territory. If all that goes through, if it's acceptable to the Ukrainians. Thing is, everyone's tired of this
Yes.
war. And the point is, maybe Putin made a maximalist, offer in his meeting in Alaska. He will come back a little bit, but he's going to also have to answer to his people, what did he win from this war after,
Yes.
putting thousands and thousands and thousands of Russians to death. So he's got to show some gain in terms of some territory. So
And that
that's
territory has to go beyond the Donetsk and Luhansk region that he had. 88% is what he perhaps has now from 75 to 88. Crimea he had. So can he retain Zaporozhye and Kherson? And we're not even talking about Sumy or Kharkiv pockets there that he has under his control, according to media reports.